The door to Hank's Roadhouse opened at 9:14 on a Sunday morning, and nobody looked up. That was the thing about Hank's on Route 35 in San Antonio. It was the kind of place where the door opened and closed so many times between 7 and noon that the little brass bell above it had stopped meaning anything years ago. Truckers came and went. Regulars slid into their usual booths without a word, without being asked, without needing to say a single thing, because the women who ran the floor already knew. 2 eggs over easy for the man at table 1. Black coffee, no cream for the retired postal worker at 5. A short stack and a side of bacon for the couple in the window who had been coming every Sunday for longer than anyone on staff could remember. The waitresses moved in the efficient, unhurried rhythm of women who had been doing this long enough to know exactly how much coffee each table needed before anyone had to ask. They read the room the way old sailors read the water. Not by looking at it hard, but by being in it so long that the looking happened on its own. A tilt of a mug meant refill. A shift of posture meant check. A hand raised halfway meant something new on the order. They did not need to be told. They had been listening to the language of this room for years, and they were fluent. So when the door opened at 9:14, nobody looked up. Nobody except Bev. Bev Hartley had been waitressing at Hank's Roadhouse for 11 years. In those 11 years, she had developed what her coworkers called the radar. Not a conscious skill, more like a tuning, a low-frequency sensitivity to wrongness. The way a dog lifts its head before the thunder that no human ear has registered yet. The way a mother wakes before the cry comes down the hallway. Something older than thought. Something that lived in the spine rather than the brain and operated on a frequency that did not have a name but was as real as gravity. She was refilling the coffee at table 3 when she felt it. She did not hear anything unusual. She did not see anything at first. She just felt the radar tick. A single clean ping in the center of her chest that said, "Pay attention." That said, something has entered this room that does not belong to the usual pattern. That said, "Turn around." She turned around. The little girl was standing just inside the door. Blonde curls that had been gathered into a ponytail by someone who was trying very hard but did not quite have the fine motor control for it yet. The elastic was too loose. Half the curls had already escaped and were hanging around her face in soft, tangled spirals that caught the morning light coming through the front windows. Bare feet on the linoleum. No shoes, no socks. Just 10 small toes on the cold gray floor of a Roadhouse diner at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning in November. 10 toes that were dirty on the bottoms in the way that feet get dirty when they have walked on concrete and pavement in the particular grime of city sidewalks that have not been cleaned in a long time. In a flannel shirt, navy blue, faded soft with years of washing. The kind of soft that only comes from being worn by the same person hundreds of times until the fabric has memorized the shape of them. So large on her small body that the hem dragged on the floor behind her like the train of a gown that belonged to someone 3 times her size. The cuffs hung past her fingertips. The collar swallowed her neck. The buttons were done up all the way to the top, every single one with the careful precision of a child who had dressed herself and had taken the time to get it right. It was not her shirt. It had never been her shirt. It was the shirt of a man who was no longer here to wear it, and the fact that she was wearing it said something that Bev could feel before she could articulate. She was holding a stuffed rabbit. White once. Gray now. The gray of something that has been loved past the point of cleanliness and into the territory of pure devotion. Past the territory where anyone would suggest washing it because washing it would mean letting go of it, and letting go of it was not something this child was prepared to do. One ear was completely missing. The other had been stitched back on in 2 different colors of thread, clearly by someone who had done it more than once and had long ago run out of matching supplies. The stitching was uneven, crooked, done with love rather than skill. Bev took 2 steps toward her. The girl did not look at her. She was scanning the room. Not the frightened, scattered scanning of a lost child looking for help. Not the wide-eyed turning of a little girl who had wandered somewhere she did not belong and was looking for a familiar face to attach herself to. This was deliberate, purposeful. The scanning of someone who was looking for something specific and knew what it looked like, who had come to this place with a destination already fixed in her mind before she ever opened the door, who had walked however many blocks it took to get here with the image of what she was looking for already sharp and clear behind those eyes. Bev stopped, because the girl had found what she was looking for. Her eyes landed on the far corner of Hank's Roadhouse. The big tables, the pushed-together booths, the section that the staff privately called the Canyon because on Sunday mornings it was occupied by 92 members of a motorcycle brotherhood whose collective presence filled that corner the way a river fills a gorge. Wall to wall, floor to ceiling, leather and denim and ink and silver, and the low-rolling thunder of male voices that had been built in bar rooms and on highways and in the particular forge of a life lived outside the lines that most people color inside. The sound that came out of that corner on any given Sunday morning was roughly comparable to geological activity. Deep, constant, felt in the floor before it reached the ears. The girl looked at that corner with pale blue eyes that should not have been as steady as they were on a face that small. Eyes that had no business being that calm, that composed, that certain. And she started walking toward it. Bev stood with the coffee pot in her hand and watched a 4-year-old girl walk past 6 booths full of ordinary Sunday morning people, past the family with a toddler in a high chair who was making a project out of destroying a pancake, past the 2 old men who came in every week and shared a newspaper and argued about football scores from 3 decades ago, as if the outcomes were still pending. Past the young couple on what was clearly a first date and was not going well because the man was talking about himself and the woman was looking at the menu with the focus of someone searching for an exit. She walked past every single one of them without slowing down, without looking sideways, without even registering that they existed. She walked the way someone walks when they are on a mission that they have been carrying for longer than a person her size should ever have to carry anything. The way a person walks when the destination is the only thing that matters and everything between here and there is just distance to be crossed. "Honey," Bev said. She said it twice. The girl did not slow down. At table 7, a man named Gerald Pwitt, who drove an 18-wheeler and had strong opinions about how eggs should be cooked, looked up from his plate and saw the girl heading toward the canyon. He leaned toward his seat partner. "That kid's headed where I think she's headed." His partner looked up and said nothing, just watched. The way you watch something when you can feel that it matters, but you do not yet know why. The girl reached the canyon. She stopped 3 feet from the man at the head of the table. He was 65 years old, silver gray hair pulled back from a face that looked like it had been assembled from something harder than regular bone. A jaw built for absorbing impact, broad and squared off at the corners. A scar that started at the left side of his chin and ran down to his collarbone in a thin, pale line that had faded with years, but had never fully surrendered to time. The kind of scar that tells you a story without needing any words. The kind that says something happened here, and the man who it happened to is still standing, and the thing that caused it is not. His hands were the size of dinner plates. One of them was wrapped around a coffee cup, and the other was resting flat on the table beside a plate of food he had not yet touched because he had been in the middle of a sentence when the sentence simply stopped. It stopped because the girl was pointing at his left forearm. At the tattoo on his left forearm, a wolf, head down, teeth visible, eyes fixed on something only it could see, watching, waiting. The lines were thick and slightly blurred at the edges the way old ink gets when it has been living under skin for decades. Decades of sun and sweat in the particular weathering that happens to a body that spends its life outdoors and in motion. It was not a new tattoo. It was the kind of tattoo that has been there so long, it has stopped being a mark on the person and has become part of the person. Part of the landscape, part of the story that the skin tells when the mouth stays quiet. She pointed at it with her small finger, steady as a compass needle. Her pale blue eyes fixed on his face with a directness that most adults could not maintain, and most children did not yet know how to attempt. A directness that said, "I am not here by accident, and I am not lost, and I know exactly what I am looking at." And she said 5 words. "My daddy has the same tattoo. Warren Calloway, hawk to every man in that room and most men outside it. Had not flinched at anything in 11 years. Not a bar fight that ended with 3 men on the floor, and one of them his. Not a wildfire in the hill country that burned 60 acres and took the roof off his own storage building while he stood in the yard and watched it go. Not the 9 funerals he had attended for 9 brothers he had ridden with and eaten with and bled with and loved in the specific wordless bone-deep way that men love each other when they have shared enough road to know what the other one looks like when everything goes wrong. When the money is gone and the weather is bad and the body is tired and the world has made it very clear that it is not going to make anything easier. He had been at those 9 funerals and he had stood in the front row each time and he had not flinched. Because that was what the men behind him needed. They needed the man in front to be solid, to be the thing that did not move. And so he did not move. He flinched, just slightly, just the tightening of the hand around the coffee cup, just the smallest shift of weight in the booth, just the micro adjustment of a man whose body has registered something before his mind has fully processed it. The body is faster than the brain. The body knows things 3 seconds before the brain catches up. And his body had just caught something that his brain was still assembling. But the men who knew him saw it, and every man at that table knew him. They saw it because Hawk did not flinch. That was the point. That was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Hawk was the man who did not flinch. And he had just flinched. He set the coffee cup down. He looked at the girl. He took in everything. The way he always took in for everything. The way a man takes in a scene when the scene might matter. Quickly. Completely. Every detail registered and filed without conscious effort. The shirt, that was the thought that hit him first. Before he had confirmed anything. Before he even knew her name. Before a single word of proof had been offered or requested. Before the conversation had moved from 5 words to 6. That shirt was Jesse's. He had seen it on the man 100 times. Seen him roll the sleeves above his elbows on warm nights around the fire. Seen him throw it over the back of a chair at the clubhouse after a ride when the evening was hot and the cold beer was calling. Seen him lend it to a prospect who was shivering on a cold night run because Jesse Dawson was the kind of man who noticed when someone near him was uncomfortable and did something about it before anyone had to ask, before anyone even knew they were uncomfortable. Jesse saw it first. Jesse always saw it first. Navy blue, faded, soft. Jesse's shirt on a 4-year-old girl standing in a diner in San Antonio on a Sunday morning in November. "What's your name, sweetheart?" His voice came out the way it always came out. Steady, quiet. The voice of a man who had learned decades ago that the softer you spoke in a hard moment, the more people heard you. The voice of a man who understood that volume was the tool of people who had nothing worth saying, and that silence could carry more weight than any shout ever built. He had learned that lesson early. He had kept it for 65 years. It had never once failed him. Lily. Lily what? She looked at him. Those eyes, pale blue, old, far too old for that face. Eyes that had seen things she should not have seen it for and had processed them in whatever way the 4-year-old processes things that are too large and too heavy and too permanent. Not by understanding them, not by contextualizing them, but by absorbing them, by letting them settle into the architecture of who she was becoming, by carrying them the way bones carry the weight of the body above them, without complaint, without commentary. Just the simple mechanical fact of bearing load. Lily Dawson. The name hit the table like a stone dropped from a great height. Derek Holt, boulder to everyone alive who knew him, had a coffee cup in his hand. The cup was ceramic, heavy, the kind of cup that a diner buys because it can survive being dropped and washed 10,000 times. It went over. Hot coffee spread across the table in a dark, slow wave that reached 3 men before it stopped, and not one of those 3 men moved to stop it. Not one of them flinched. Not one of them even looked at the spreading pool, because their eyes were locked on the girl and their brains were trying to do something with the name Dawson that their chests had already done. Their chests had heard the name and responded before the first syllable had finished crossing the air. Their brains were still 3 steps behind, trying to catch up to what their hearts already knew. Boulder sat with hot coffee soaking into his sleeve and stared at the surface of the table as if the Formica had just spoken to him in a language he had spent his whole life trying not to learn. Tyler Maddox, Finch, 26 years old, the youngest man at the table and the loudest voice in any room he entered. The running commentary, the narrator, the man who cracked jokes at funerals because he believed that if you could find the absurdity in something, it could not fully own you. He was the voice of the room, the way a river is the voice of a valley, always moving, always filling silence before silence had a chance to settle, always there with a word or a line or an observation that kept the energy flowing and the mood from landing in any one place for too long. He had been doing it since he was 16 years old, and he was very good at it, and he had never once failed to find the words. He went pale, actually visibly completely pale. The color left his face in a single wave that started at his forehead and moved down, and the freckles across his nose stood out like they had been painted on porcelain. And for the first time in his adult life, the words were not there. The running commentary stopped. The narrator went silent. Nathan Pruitt, Stitcher, grabbed the edge of the booth with both hands. 2 tours in Iraq, hands that had been steady in places where steadiness was the difference between someone living and someone not living. Hands that had tied off wounds and held pressure and performed the specific brutal intimacy of keeping a human body together when the body itself had decided to come apart. Hands that had not shaken in Fallujah, that had not shaken in the aid station outside Ramadi when the RPG hit 20 meters away and the ceiling came down, and he kept working on the man on the table in front of him because the man on the table needed him to keep working. Those hands grabbed the formica edge of the booth, and the table shifted an inch, and the coffee that had been spreading from Boulder's cup changed direction. Samuel Briggs, deacon, reached for the silver cross at his throat. His fingers closed around it, and his lips pressed together in a thin, hard line, and he looked up at the ceiling for exactly 1 second, asking something, receiving something. Something between a man and whatever he believed was above him, in a conversation that was older than the room and would outlast everyone in it. A conversation that had been running his entire life. The continuous open line between Samuel Briggs and whatever he had decided to call the thing on the other end. Marcus Gentry, Flint, leaned forward. Flint was the man who watched everything and registered nothing. He was the surveillance system of the group, the camera that recorded without reacting. In 14 years of knowing him, Hawk had never once seen Flint's face change temperature in response to new information. He always looked the same, assessing, processing, filing. His face was the same controlled neutral in every situation. He leaned forward, and that single involuntary shift of his weight said more than a speech, because Flint did not lean forward. Flint did not move toward things. Things came to Flint, and Flint assessed them from whatever position he was already in. And this had moved him. This 4-year-old girl with a dead man's name in her mouth had moved Marcus Gentry off his center. Kevin Rourke, Fuse, who was always crackling, always loaded with energy, always about to be in motion, always on the edge of something kinetic. The man in any room who was most likely to do something in the next 3 seconds and least likely to tell you what it was going to be before he did it. Fuse was the man you kept an eye on, not because he was dangerous, but because he was always about 3 seconds from doing something, and you wanted to know what it was going to be before it happened. He vibrated at a frequency that most people found exhausting and that a specific few people found essential. He went absolutely still. The complete, total, unnatural stillness of a man who has been stopped in the middle of a current by something strong enough to override the current itself. Like a river hitting a wall. All that energy, all that motion, all that constant kinetic crackling stopped. Hawk looked at the girl. He said her name again, carefully. The way you say something when you need to be certain you heard it correctly and also need a moment before you deal with what hearing it correctly is going to mean. Lily Dawson, she nodded. Simple. The way children confirm facts without understanding why adults need additional time to process them. Like she was confirming that yes, 2 + 2 = 4, and she was not sure why that was a difficult concept for the grown-up in front of her. Children do not know yet that some truths require time, that some names carry weight, that some facts land on the people who hear them like physical objects falling from a height. Who's your daddy, Lily? She had clearly rehearsed this. He could see it. The way she took a half breath first. The small preparatory inhale of someone who was about to recite something they have committed to memory because they knew it was going to matter. The way a child takes a breath before the lines in a school play. Except this was not a play, and the lines had been given to her by a dying man who had known that someday his daughter would need to say them to strangers in a diner and had prepared her for that moment with everything he had left. His name was Jesse Dawson. She said it clearly, carefully, each syllable placed with intention. But everybody called him Blaze. Boulder made a sound, not a word, not anything close to a word. The sound that a very large man makes when something that has been sealed inside him for a long time tears open without any warning, and the contents have nowhere to go. A sound from somewhere below the lungs, below the ribs, from whatever part of a man stores the things he cannot afford to feel during the hours when he has to function, and the miles when he has to ride, and the fights when he has to stand. Boulder was the man who took hits, who absorbed weight, who stood between whatever was coming and the people behind him, who had once held a collapsing roof beam above his head for 90 seconds while 3 men crawled out from under it and had said nothing about it afterward except that his shoulders were sore. He was the wall, the barrier, the thing that did not move when everything else was moving. He made that sound, and then he pressed both fists flat on the coffee-soaked table and stared at them and did not move. Because moving was not available to him right now. Moving required something that he had temporarily lost. Finch turned away. His hand came up over his face and the heel of his palm pressed hard against his eyes, pushing something back, trying to contain something that was not designed to be contained, trying to hold a door closed that had been blown open by a 4-year-old girl saying 7 words in a diner on a Sunday morning. Stitcher closed his eyes just for a second, then opened them again. And something behind them had changed. The temperature had changed. The way a medic's face changes when he has moved from the part of a situation that involves feeling things to the part that involves doing something about them. A toggle, a switch, a mechanism built by training and reinforced by years of practice and 2 tours of seeing things that required him to set feeling aside and focus on function. He had flipped that switch, and then behind his eyes the medic was awake. Hawk looked at the girl. He looked at the rabbit, at the dragging hem of the flannel shirt, at the bare feet on the linoleum, at the ancient, unafraid eyes that should not have existed in a face that young, at the ponytail that was losing its war with gravity, at the collar buttoned all the way up by small fingers that had taken the time to get every button right. He said it carefully. You said his name was. Lily looked at him with those eyes. He died. She said it the way a 4-year-old says a true thing, without cruelty and without cushioning. Because she had not yet learned that true things can be weapons. Because nobody had yet taught her the adult skill of wrapping hard facts in soft language to protect the person receiving them. She said it clean and she said it straight, and the cleanness of it was the thing that made it land so hard. There was no buffer, no padding, no preamble, just the fact arriving in the air between them at the speed of a child's honesty. 9 months ago, the doctor said his brain was sick, Mommy told me. The canyon went quiet, not the usual between sentences quiet, not the quiet of men pausing before they speak, not even the quiet of men who have received bad news and are absorbing it the way a sponge absorbs water, slowly, from the outside in. This was the total silence of men who have been struck somewhere that has no armor, who are standing in the exact place where the blow landed and are not yet sure how they are still upright. The silence that comes after the thing that changes everything, and before anyone has figured out what the new everything looks like. The silence of a room full of men who are realizing simultaneously that the world they woke up in this morning is not the world they are standing in now. And the new world has a dead man in it who they did not know was dead. And the dead man's daughter is standing in front of them, wearing his shirt. 9 months. Jesse Dawson had been dead for 9 months, and none of them had known. Jesse, who had ridden at Hawk's left shoulder for 11 years. Who had been the man you could count on to be there when you looked to your left. Not because he was told to ride there, but because he chose to ride there. Because Hawk's left side was the side that was hardest to cover, and Jesse had put himself there the way a man puts himself between danger and the people he has decided to protect. Without being asked, without expecting credit, without wanting anything in return except the knowledge that the man next to him was safe. Jesse, who had pulled Hawk out of a burning equipment shed in the hill country during a wildfire in the summer of 2019. Fire on 3 sides, smoke so thick you could not see your own boots. The heat pressing against your skin like a living thing trying to find a way inside, trying to get through the leather and the denim and the skin and into the part of you that burns. Jesse had come through the smoke, had not hesitated, had not stopped to calculate the risk or measure the odds, or do any of the things that reasonable people do before they enter a burning building. He had come through the smoke because Hawk was inside, and that was the only calculation that mattered. He had grabbed Hawk by the back of his vest, had dragged him 15 feet over burning timber while the roof cracked and groaned above them like something alive and angry. Had taken a burn across his right forearm that left a scar shaped like a crescent moon, and had said, grinning through the soot on his face with his forearm still smoking, "Don't worry about it. Barely even touched me." Jesse, whose laugh sounded like a man who was in on a joke that the rest of the world had not heard yet, who had the particular quality of making every person near him feel like the most important person in the room. Not through effort, not through performance, through something that was simply built into the way he occupied space, the way he looked at you when you were talking, the way he listened with his whole body, the way he made you feel that whatever you were saying is the most interesting thing he had heard all day, even if you were talking about the weather or the price of gasoline or nothing at all. That man had been dead for 9 months, and none of them had known. There had been a falling out. Hawk felt the weight of it now, the way you feel the weight of something you have been carrying so long that you forgot you were carrying it until someone mentions it, and suddenly your arms are tired. Chapter business. An argument about a decision that should have been handled differently. Words said in heat that should have been taken back and cool, but were not taken back because both men were stubborn, and both men were proud, and both men believed that being right was more important than being together. Jesse had stepped back, not slammed the door, not burned bridges, just stepped back. And the distance had grown the way distance grows between men who care about each other, but have not yet learned that caring requires maintenance. Slowly, quietly, an inch at a time until the inches became miles and the miles became years, and the years became the kind of silence that is too heavy to break from either side. They had all assumed he was living his life, assumed they would find their way back to each other when the time was right, assumed that the road was long and that long roads always curve back around eventually, that there would be a moment, a phone call, a chance meeting at a gas station or a rally or a funeral for someone else that would put them in the same room, and the same room would do the rest. The road had ended, and none of them had been there for the last mile. Boulder's voice came from somewhere near the table, low, not intending to be heard by anyone except whoever happened to be in the room. "The time just ran out before we got there." He said it like a man who did not mean to say it out loud and knew it did not matter because it was true. No one answered him because there was nothing to answer with. Hawk felt something move in his chest that had no name and did not want one. "How did you find us, Lily?" She reached into the pocket of the enormous flannel shirt. The pocket hung at her knee. Her small hand disappeared into it and came back holding a keychain. Leather, dark brown, the size of a man's palm, worn smooth at the edges from years of handling, cracked along one side with age. The kind of object that has been touched so many times by the same pair of hands that it has taken on the shape of those hands, that it carries the memory of those hands even after the hands are gone, that it holds the warmth of those hands even when the hands have gone cold. On one face, a photograph had been laminated into the leather, protected under a thin, clear layer that had yellowed slightly with time. A group of men around a bonfire somewhere in the hill country, firelight on their faces, the orange glow catching jaw lines and cheekbones, and the glint of silver rings, and the soft blur of smoke rising behind them into a night sky that was full of stars. The kind of photograph you take when you are young and the road ahead still feels infinite, when you have not yet learned that roads end, when you believe with the full force of a young man's certainty that the people around you in this moment will be around you in every moment that follows. At the center of the photograph, laughing, his arm thrown around Hawk's shoulders, Jesse Dawson, 28 years old in that photograph, strong, alive, grinning the grin that said, "I know something wonderful and I am not going to tell you what it is, but I might let you find out on your own if you ride with me long enough." The grin that every man at that table had seen 1,000 times and would never see again, except in this photograph on this keychain in the hands of this 4-year-old girl. Hawk took the keychain. His hands were not steady. He turned it over, on the back, burned into the leather, in letters that were uneven and barely staying on the line. The handwriting of a man whose hands were no longer fully obeying his mind, whose fingers had lost the fine control that burning letters into leather required. Who had done it anyway? Who had pushed through whatever his dying body was doing to his coordination and had finished the job because this message was more important than the difficulty of writing it, more important than the pain, more important than the exhaustion, more important than the tumor in his brain that was stealing his motor function one letter at a time. Lily. These men are Daddy's brothers. Hank's Roadhouse, Route 35. Sunday mornings, their family. They'll remember. They will help you. Find them when you need them. I love you to the stars and back, and then to the stars again. Baby girl. Daddy. Hawk read it once. He read it again. He read it a third time. And then he had to stop reading it because something was happening in his throat that he was not going to let happen. Not yet. Not until he understood the full shape of what was standing in front of him. Not until he had taken the measure of this moment and decided what it required from him and from the 91 men behind him who were waiting for him to speak, who were looking at him the way they always looked at him when the moment was heavy and the decision was his. He wrote this, Hawk said. His voice was controlled in the way a voice is controlled when control is the only thing standing between a man and something he cannot afford. Not now, not yet, he wrote this himself, when his hands shook really bad. Lily said it as fact, not sad, not dramatic, just a precise observation of a child who had watched her father's body betray him and had recorded the details the way children record everything. With perfect clarity and without editorial, without judgment, without the softening that adults learn to apply to the hard things. She saw it as it was, and she said it as it was. Mommy told me he made her watch. He didn't want to stop until it was finished. She paused, a small pause. The kind of pause a child takes when she is remembering the next part of something she has stored carefully. The way you pause between lines of a poem you have memorized, not because you have forgotten, but because the next part is heavier than the part before it. He burned the letters because he said it would last longer than ink. He said ink fades, but leather lasts forever. Finch's head went to the table. His forehead hit the formica, and he stayed there. Finch, who narrated everything, who had a joke for every silence, who had been the room's voice for as long as most of them could remember. He put his forehead on the table and the narration stopped. The narrator was done. The story had gotten bigger than the narrator. Boulder was still staring at his hands, his fists still flat on the table, his coffee still soaking into his sleeve. He had not moved. He was not going to move. Stitcher's jaw was working, moving back and forth. The slow, mechanical motion of a man who is processing something that will not go down, that has lodged somewhere between comprehension and acceptance, and is not moving in either direction. Flint's eyes were on Lily's face, and something in them had cracked open. Not wide open, just cracked. The first hairline fracture in something that was going to keep splitting before it stopped. Fuse had both fists on the table. Not angry fists, not threatening fists. The fists of a man who has just been handed a specific and righteous direction and has not yet been given the signal to move, but is ready, is loaded, is waiting. Deacon was praying silently. His lips barely moved. The cross was in both his hands pressed against his mouth. The conversation with whatever was on the other end of his line had shifted from asking to something else, something more urgent, something that sounded less like a prayer and more like a demand. Hawk looked at the keychain, at Jesse's face, 28 years old and laughing and alive, lit by the bonfire in that hill country field. A face that would never age past whatever age it had reached before the tumor took it. A face frozen in firelight and friendship and the specific immortality of a photograph that someone had the good sense to take on a night that mattered. He looked at the chin on this 4-year-old girl's face. That was the thing that hit him hardest, not the shirt, not the name, not the keychain, not the message burned into leather by dying hands. The chin, that stubborn, lifted chin. The chin that said, I am handling this and I will keep handling it, and if you try to help me, I will tell you I am fine because I do not want you to have to worry about me on top of everything else. The chin that said, I have been carrying something that is too heavy for me, and I have been carrying it anyway, and I am not going to put it down just because you are looking at me. Jesse's chin. So precise. So perfectly replicated on a different face. A smaller face. A face that should have been soft and carefree and full of nothing more serious than whether there would be sprinkles on something. Jesse's chin on Jesse's daughter. The genetic echo of a man who was gone. Hawk had to look away, just for a breath, just long enough to let whatever was happening behind his eyes happen without an audience. He looked back. Lily, where is your mommy? Something moved through her eyes, fast, like a shadow crossing an open field. There and gone. The chin stayed up. The eyes stayed direct. But what was behind them was heavier now. What was behind them had shifted from the weight of the mission to the weight of the reason for the mission. She's home. She has to stay near the machine. The machine helps her, but it makes scary sounds. I don't like the machine. A pause. She needs a new kidney. The doctor said so, but it costs too much money. Mommy tried to hide the papers, but I saw the numbers, and there were a lot of zeros. Not one man at that table moved. Mommy cries at night. Lily continued. Her voice was steady. She was reciting this the way she had recited her father's name, because she had known she would need to say it, and she had prepared for the saying of it. Rehearsed it in whatever private way a 4-year-old rehearses the things that are too big for her, but have been assigned to her anyway by a world that was not paying attention to how small she was. She tries to be quiet, but I hear everything. I don't let her know I'm awake because she tries not to cry when she thinks I'm listening. The diner around them had stopped existing. There were other people in that room. There were other conversations and other lives being lived at 14 other tables. None of it existed. None of it mattered. There was nothing in Hank's Roadhouse except a 4-year-old girl in her dead father's flannel shirt and the weight that she was carrying. Weight that no 4-year-old should ever know the shape of. Weight that should have been distributed among adults and institutions and systems that were supposed to catch people when they fell. But the adults were gone, and the institutions had failed, and the systems had looked at a sick woman and a small child and had decided they were a file number rather than a family. And the man who owns our building, Lily said. Her voice dropped. Not quieter, lower, like the words themselves were heavier and required more effort to lift off the ground, like they were made of something denser than the words that had come before. He's really mean. She said it simply, the way you say a fact. Water is wet, the sky is blue. The man who owns our building is really mean. He comes to the door and yells. He says bad words. He hit the wall once so hard I thought the building was going to fall down. A beat. A small, terrible beat. He says we have to leave. She paused. He grabbed my arm last week in the hallway. He grabbed it really hard. She held up her left arm. 4 bruises, the size of fingers, a grown man's fingers on a 4-year-old girl's arm. Purple at the centers, fading to yellow at the edges in the specific gradient of bruises that are 6 or 7 days old. Not fresh, not healed. In the middle place where the body is still trying to repair what was done to it and has not yet finished. Hawk looked at those bruises. He looked at them for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked away. Not because he could not bear to see them, because looking at them was doing something to the temperature inside him that he needed to control for just a little while longer. Because the part of him that wanted to stand up from this booth and walk out of this diner and find the man who had put those marks on this child's arm and deliver a specific and permanent education was very loud right now, very clear, very ready. And the part of him that knew this little girl needed him to be calm and present and thinking clearly was also very loud. And the second part needed to win, not because the first part was wrong, but because the first part could wait, and the little girl in front of him could not. What did Lily say? Hawk asked carefully. When it happened. Megan pressed both hands over her eyes. This was Lily still talking, telling him what her mother had told her, or what she had told her mother. She said, it's okay, Mommy. He's just unhappy inside. The room absorbed that. She said it twice. 4 years old, she made excuses for a grown man who hurt her because she didn't want me to be upset. Daddy's letter said to find you. Lily held up the keychain. He said you'd remember him. She looked at Hawk directly. Those pale blue eyes, the lifted chin, Jesse's eyes. Jessie's absolute refusal to look away from whatever was in front of her. The genetic inheritance of a man who had spent his life facing things head-on and had apparently passed that quality to his daughter, along with his eye color and his jawline. Was he right? Hawk looked at the photograph on the keychain. Jesse's face, 28 years old and laughing and gone. He looked at his brothers, at Boulder Jaw locked and already nodding before any decision had been voiced. At Finch, head up from the table, now red-eyed and resolved. The narrator had come back online, and the story he was narrating now was different from every story before it. At Stitcher, both hands flat on the table and his face already in the mode. The problem-solving mode. The mode that had kept men alive in places where staying alive was not the expected outcome. At Deacon Cross pressed to his lips and his eyes on Hawk with the steady faith of a man who believed that what was about to happen next was exactly what was supposed to happen. That every mile they had ridden and every Sunday they had spent in this diner and every year they had spent building this brotherhood had been leading to this moment. At Flint phone already in his hand, because Flint was always 3 steps ahead, and the step he was on right now was the step that came after the decision that had not yet been spoken, but that every man in the canyon already knew, already felt, already accepted. At Fuse, both fists on the table and in his face a specific readiness. The readiness of a man who has been coiled for his entire adult life and has finally been given something worth uncoiling for. A direction, a purpose, a reason to let all that contained energy go somewhere that matters. Behind those 686 more men filling the canyon. And every single one of them was looking at Hawk the way they always looked at Hawk when what he said next was going to determine what happened to all of them. Hawk looked back at Lily. He opened his mouth to answer, and then he stopped. Because his voice, which had been doing something unreliable in the back of his throat for the last 3 minutes, made it clear that the next sentence was not going to come out the way he intended unless he gave it a second. He gave it a second. Then, "Yeah, sweetheart." His voice cracked. He let it, because this was the one sentence in his 65 years that had earned the right to crack. That had paid in full for whatever imperfection it carried. That deserved the honesty of a man who was feeling something too large for his voice to hold and was saying it anyway. He was right. He reached out and placed one hand on Lily's shoulder. The hand that had bent at metal and broken jaws and built things and carried weight and held brothers together in the worst moments of their lives. He put that hand on a 4-year-old girl's shoulder as gently as if she were made of something irreplaceable, which she was. "Your daddy was our brother," he said. "That makes you family, and we don't let family drown." He looked up. One look. Not a speech, not a command, not an instruction, just one current of understanding that passed through 91 men simultaneously. Silent and total and electric, like a charge moving through a wire, like a signal sent and received in the same instant. Every man in that canyon understood in the same heartbeat what was being asked and what was being offered and what was about to happen. No vote needed, no discussion, no time. Boulder. Hawk's voice had returned to what it always was, steady and quiet and carrying weight. "Get the trucks ready. Full convoy." He looked to his left. "Stitcher. I need the best kidney specialist in the state of Texas. Names and phone numbers. 30 minutes. He looked to his right. "Finch, Megan Dawson, somewhere in the city. I need an address. 15 minutes. Finch was already standing. Phone out. Head down. Moving. The narrator had a new story, and the new story required action. Fuse. Hawk looked at the crackling, coiled, barely contained Kevin Rourke. "Lily doesn't leave your sight." Fuse stood up from the booth, and every joint in his body announced that it was ready. He was 6 feet tall and 230 pounds of a man who had been called difficult and short-fused and perpetually ready for something by every person who had known him in his adult life. He walked around the table and he crouched down until he was looking a 4-year-old girl directly in the eyes. Something in his face did something it almost never did. It opened, not all at once, not dramatically, just a crack. The same kind of crack that had appeared in Flint's composure, but different, because Flint's crack was about what he was feeling, and Fuse's crack was about what he was becoming. Something was happening in Kevin Rourke that had never happened before. He was meeting someone who was going to change the architecture of his interior life. He just did not know it yet. Hey, he said, you like waffles? Lily looked at him. Those old eyes, that lifted chin, the judgment of a child who had learned to read adults quickly because her circumstances required it, who had developed the ability to assess a person in seconds because the people around her had not always been safe, and she needed to know which ones were. She had a system. It was not a system anyone had taught her. It was a system she had built herself out of necessity. And it worked. And she was running it on Kevin Rourke right now. She read him. Whatever she saw there passed whatever test she was running, with sprinkles. Fuse did not smile. It was not quite a smile, but something happened near his eyes that was close. Something that might have become a smile in a less guarded man. Something that in Kevin Rourke was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Is there another kind? Lily almost smiled. It was small and quick and gone almost before it arrived. Like a bird that lands and takes off again before you are certain it was there at all. But it was real. For a fraction of a second, the 4-year-old girl who had carried a dead man's message 14 blocks on bare feet allowed herself to be a child who was amused by something. She reached out and took his hand. Her small fingers could not wrap around two of his. But she held on, and Fuse held back. And something in Kevin Rourke's chest moved into a position it had never been in before and was going to stay there permanently. He just did not know that yet. Hawk stood. Every joint in his body announced 65 years of hard miles. He stood anyway. The way he had always stood, like standing was a decision, and he had made it, and the decision was final. Saddle up, he said. We ride in 20 minutes. Behind him, 91 men moved as one. The sound of it filled Hank's roadhouse like a tide coming in, chairs scraping, boots on the floor, the shift of 91 large bodies moving from complete stillness into coordinated, purposeful motion. The sound of men who have been given a direction and have accepted it without question, because the man who gave it has earned the right to give it, and they have earned the right to follow it. And both of those things are true at the same time. Bev Hartley, the waitress with the radar, pressed both hands flat against her chest and stood against the far wall and watched it happen. Watched 91 men in leather and denim and silver stand up from that corner and move toward the door with the synchronized purpose of something that was not a group of individuals, but a single organism with 91 moving parts. She had seen things in 11 years at Hank's Roadhouse. She had seen fights and reunions, and proposals, and breakdowns, and the full catalog of human behavior that unfolds in a place where people come to eat breakfast and end up doing much more than that. She had never seen anything like this. At the counter, Lily sat on a stool too tall for her, feet 6 inches off the floor, eating waffles with rainbow sprinkles. A plate of them. The cook had made them without being asked because the cook had been watching through the kitchen window and had seen the same thing everyone else had seen and had decided that the appropriate response was waffles. Extra sprinkles, because whatever was happening here required extra sprinkles. Fuse sat beside her like a 230-pound personal security detail. His coffee was untouched. His eyes moved from the door to the room to the windows and back to Lily in a continuous sweep that was not conscious but was thorough. The instinct of a man who has been handed something to protect and has decided that the protecting of it is now the most important thing he has ever done. These are good, Lily said. Yeah. Fuse's voice was doing something unusual, thick, like the words had to push through something to get out. He cleared his throat. Yeah, they are. Lily looked up at him, fork in hand, syrup on her chin, a piece of rainbow sprinkle stuck to her lower lip. Are you going to help my mommy? Fuse looked at this child, at the pale blue eyes that had seen too much, at the chin that refused to go down, at the flannel shirt that used to belong to a man he would have died for and would still die for, even now. 9 months after that man had stopped being somewhere you could die for him and had moved to wherever you go when the road runs out. Kid, Fuse said. He said it the way you say something when you mean every single syllable of it, and you want the person in front of you to understand that what you are about to say is not a hope and not an intention and not a plan. It is a fact. It is already true. It became true the moment you said it, and nothing in the world is going to make it untrue. We're going to do a lot more than that. Outside, 92 Harley-Davidson engines turned over. The sound rolled across the parking lot of Hank's Roadhouse and out into the San Antonio Sunday morning like something that had been waiting to be released. Not like an arrival, like a declaration, like the sound a thing makes when it has decided what it is going to do and is no longer interested in waiting. Against everything that had gone wrong for a dead man's family in 9 long months. Against a sick woman alone in a dark apartment with a dying body and a machine that wheezed through the night. Against a 4-year-old girl who had been carrying her family on shoulders that should not have known the shape of that weight. Jesse Dawson had burned a message into leather with hands that could barely form the letters. He had trusted 92 men with his daughter's life, and 92 men were about to find out whether they deserved that trust. Finch had the address in 11 minutes. 47 Rosewood Court, apartment 2B, second floor. Above a pawn shop in the part of the city where the mailboxes had been broken for so long, nobody expected them to work anymore. Where the sidewalks had cracks that grew weeds in summer and collected rain in winter. Where the streetlights worked on some blocks and did not work on others, and the people who lived there had stopped filing complaints about either because complaints required a belief that someone was listening, and that belief had been used up a long time ago. 14 blocks from Hank's Roadhouse. 14 blocks that a 4-year-old girl had walked on bare feet carrying a one-eared rabbit and a leather keychain and a dead man's instructions. Hawk pulled out of the lot first. He always rode in front, 27 years at the head of the pack. The position that meant if something was coming, it hit you first, and if a decision needed to be made in the space between 1 second and the next, you were the one who made it. But today the road was not just road. Today it was a straight line to a woman who did not know that help was 11 minutes away, who did not know that her husband's last act on this earth had worked, that the message he had burned into leather with dying hands had been carried by his daughter's living ones to exactly the people he had intended it to reach. Hawk twisted the throttle. Behind him, 91 engines followed. The convoy moved through San Antonio in a formation that had been practiced on 1,000 rides and had never once been discussed. It did not need to be discussed. It organized itself the way water organizes itself when it finds a channel. Front riders wide, middle riders tight, rear riders watching the mirrors. The ambulance lane left open in the center, even though there was no ambulance yet, because the habit of protecting the center was older than the reason and would outlast it. They passed strip malls and gas stations and churches with their doors open for the 9:30 service, and parking lots where families were loading into minivans for whatever families do on Sunday mornings in November. They passed a group of teenagers on a corner who stopped talking and stared, and one of them pulled out a phone and started recording, and another one said something that made the first one put the phone away, because even a teenager could recognize something that was not meant to be watched through a screen. And in his vest pocket, pressed against his chest, the leather keychain vibrated with the engine. Jesse's face by the bonfire. Jesse's arm around his shoulders. Jesse's grin, like he was riding with them one last time. Hawk rode and he thought about Jesse Dawson. He thought about the last time he had seen him. 3 years ago, maybe longer. A gas station on the edge of the city. Hawk filling up. Jesse pulling in on the other side of the pumps. They had looked at each other across 12 feet of concrete and gasoline fumes, and neither one of them had spoken first, because the silence between them had become a thing with weight and mass, and it was sitting on both their tongues. Jesse had nodded. Hawk had nodded back, and that had been it. That had been the last exchange between two men who had ridden together for 11 years. A nod across a gas station. Hawk had thought about crossing those 12 feet 100 times since, 1,000 times, had replayed the moment and imagined a different version. One where he walked over, one where he said something, anything. One where the silence lost and the words won and the 12 feet became 0 and the years of distance collapsed into a handshake or a shoulder grip or the particular wordless embrace of two men who are too stubborn to say what they feel but can communicate the full weight of it through 3 seconds of contact. He had not crossed those 12 feet, and now Jesse was gone and the 12 feet had become a distance that could never be closed, and Hawk was riding toward a woman and a child he had never met, carrying a debt that could not be repaid but could be honored. They turned onto Rosewood Court. The street announced itself before they reached it. The change was gradual, the way poverty is always gradual from the outside. The lawns getting thinner, the paint getting duller, the fences sagging at the same angle in the same direction, as if exhaustion were a weather pattern that blew from one end of the block to the other. a shopping cart on its side in a drainage ditch, a mattress leaning against a telephone pole wrapped in a blue tarp that had torn and was flapping in the November wind. Number 47 was a two-story building above a pawn shop. The pawn shop was closed. Its security gate was down and covered in a layer of grime that suggested it had not been raised in some time. The building above it had four windows facing the street. Two of them had curtains. One had a bedsheet pinned in place. The fourth was bare and dark. 92 engines went quiet in sequence, one by one by one. And when the last engine cut out, the silence that settled over Rosewood Court was somehow louder than the noise had been. The silence of something that had been making itself known and was now making itself known in a different way, through presence rather than sound. Hawk looked up at the building. He thought about Lily walking down those stairs every morning, bare feet on concrete, 4 years old, alone, carrying the rabbit, carrying the weight. His jaw tightened. Boulder, Stitcher, you're with me, views. Keep Lily in the truck until I call. Lily was in Boulder's pickup with the rabbit pressed against her chest, watching the building through the windshield. Is Mommy going to be scared? Lily asked. Not for long, Fuse said. Lily thought about this for a moment. Then she nodded. Businesslike, as if fear were a logistical problem that had just been assigned to the appropriate department. They climbed the stairs. The railing was loose. The third step had a crack wide enough to catch a boot heel. The hallway smelled like old carpet and cooking grease. Second floor, end of the hall, a door. Below the peephole, a piece of cardboard taped to the wood. On it, a drawing in crayon. A woman and a small girl with yellow hair holding hands, standing in front of a house with a red door. Below it, in large, careful, partially backwards letters, Lily and Mommy's place. Hawk stood in front of that door. Just for a moment, just one breath. Then he knocked 3 times. Megan, Megan Dawson, my name is Hawk. I knew your husband. Jesse, Blaze. A sound from inside. Movement, slow. The shuffle of someone for whom crossing a room cost something. The lock turned. The chain pulled taut. The door opened 4 inches. Hawk had been prepared for bad. He had spent 14 blocks on a motorcycle preparing himself. He had run the scenarios. He had prepared for a woman in difficulty, for poverty, for illness. He was not prepared for this. Megan Dawson was 29 years old. She looked like someone had subtracted a decade from her face and then added it back in the wrong places. Blonde hair, the exact shade of Lily's, pulled back loosely from a face that was sharp in the way that faces become sharp when the body beneath them has been consuming itself to stay alive. Collarbones too visible above the neckline of a shirt that had once fit properly and now hung on her the way clothes hang on a frame that has been reduced. Tubes at her left arm. An IV pole behind her visible through the gap. And eyes, pale blue. The same as Lily's. The same as Jesse's. Exhausted and terrified and holding on to something by the thinnest possible thread. She saw his forearm through the 4-inch gap. She saw the wolf. Her hand went to her mouth. Oh God, she whispered. Oh God, we've got Lily, Hawk said immediately. She's safe. She's downstairs with one of my brothers. She had the keychain. She came and found us. She's okay. Megan's knees went. Boulder's arm was through the gap before she hit the floor. His massive hand catching her elbow and bearing her weight with the ease of a man for whom bearing weight was as natural as breathing. Easy, Boulder said, his voice barely above a breath. We've got you. Can you take the chain off? It took her 3 tries. On the third, the chain moved. The door swung open, and Megan looked past Hawk, past Boulder, past Stitcher, down the stairwell, looking for her daughter. She's safe, Hawk said again. I promise you. She's eating waffles. Megan pressed both hands over her face and her whole body shook in the way that happens when relief is so enormous it cannot be told apart from pain. He said you'd come, she whispered. He made me promise to keep that keychain. He said Lily would know when she needed to use it. Her voice was breaking into pieces. I thought he was delirious. The tumor was affecting his cognition near the end. I thought he was confused when he kept saying it. They'll come, Megan. When you need them, they'll come. Hawk looked at her. He wasn't delirious, he said. And Megan looked at him. Really looked. And something passed between them that had nothing to do with motorcycles or brotherhood or leather. something that was only about shared grief. Two people who had loved the same man standing in the rubble of that loss and seeing each other for the first time. He talked about you, she said, all the time, especially near the end. He'd be in that bed too weak to lift his arms and he'd say Hawk knows what to do. He'd say Boulder would make you laugh. He'd say Stitcher would fix it. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. He wasn't scared of dying, he was only scared of leaving us. That was the only thing in this world that scared him. Boulder turned away and pressed his shoulder against the doorframe. His whole body shook once, contained. Hawk looked at Stitcher. Stitcher had moved past them into the apartment, and his face had changed, not dramatically, the way a thermometer changes, a degree at a time. But Hawk had known Stitcher for 16 years, and right now the thermometer was telling him that the situation was worse than anything they had anticipated. Hawk, Stitcher said quietly, come here. Hawk stepped in, and he saw what Jesse Dawson's family had been living in for 9 months. A mattress on the floor, no bed frame, 2 milk crates for a nightstand, a portable dialysis machine in the corner humming and clicking in a rhythm that was just slightly wrong, a card table buried in paper, medical bills, shut-off notices, eviction notices stamped in red, collection letters. The refrigerator contained apple juice, half a jar of peanut butter, a sleeve of crackers, nothing else. In the corner designated as a child's space, a pile of crayons, a coloring book, 3 picture books, and a blanket folded into a perfectly neat square. The way a child folds it when someone has told her many times to keep her space tidy, and she has done her absolute best. Stitcher pulled Hawk aside. Her oxygen saturation is at 83%. His voice was controlled and precise, the voice of a man delivering intelligence in a combat situation. That's critical. The home dialysis unit is keeping her alive, but it's not keeping her stable. Kidney failure stage 5 with cardiac complications. Hawk, this is not a slow decline. This is active crisis. How long? Hawk said. Without intervention. Weeks, maybe fewer. Best surgeon in the state, he said. Now. I already have a name, Stitcher said. Dr. Helen Cartwright, UT Health. She lost her own daughter to kidney disease 4 years ago. She's one of the best in the country. She takes pro bono cases when the cause is right. I believe this is a right cause. Call her. Phone's already in my hand. Hawk turned back to Megan. She was sitting on the mattress. Boulder was crouching beside her, talking in a voice that sounded nothing like his usual voice. Hawk caught what Megan was saying. Tuesday at midnight, she said. He came and kicked the door until the chain bent. I had Lily in the closet because I didn't know if he was going to break through. She was in there for 40 minutes, her hands twisted in her lap. She didn't make a sound, not one sound. She was 4 years old in a closet for 40 minutes, and she did not make a single sound. The landlord, Boulder said, not a question. His name is Dale Grissom. He said if we're not out by the end of the month, he has people who handle situations. He said a sick woman alone with a kid doesn't have a lot of options. Last week, Lily was coming up from outside. Dale was in the hallway. He grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks. 4 of them. Boulder's hand curled into a fist, slowly, with the geological patience of something that is very cold and very large. What did Lily say? Hawk asked. When it happened. Megan pressed both hands over her eyes. She said it's okay, Mommy. He's just unhappy inside. She said it twice. 4 years old. She made excuses for a grown man who hurt her because she didn't want me to be upset. Hawk stood. She won't have to do that anymore, he said. He walked to the door. Finch, Fuse, Storm, 3 more now. Boots on the stairs. Finch arrived with the landlord's information already written on his hand. Dale Grissom, management office ground floor of the strip mall 2 blocks south. Hawk looked at Finch, at Boulder, at 2 more men. Handle it. Dale Grissom had built his entire life around one principle. Find people with no options and remind them of that fact every single day until they either paid or disappeared. He had done it for 22 years. He had never once been on the receiving end. He was at his desk when the glass door opened. He looked up and the color left his face. All at once. Finch walked in first, then Storm, then 2 more men, and then Boulder, who had to turn slightly sideways to clear the doorframe. Dale Grissom, Finch said. Pleasant. The pleasantness of a man who is not in a hurry and knows he holds every card. Who's asking? Friends of Megan Dawson. She owes 3 months. I've been more than patient. You've been banging on her door at midnight, Finch said. You've been screaming through the walls, Boulder said from directly behind Grissom, who flinched so hard his chair rolled back and his elbow knocked his coffee mug off the desk. The mug broke on the floor. Grissom tried to stand, tried to locate authority that had completely abandoned him. Sit down, Dale, Boulder said. Conversational, quiet, no threat in the tone because no threat was necessary. Grissom sat. Finch pulled a chair directly across from him. Let's talk about last week. The hallway, the little girl, Lily Dawson, 4 years old, blonde curls, one-eared rabbit. You grabbed her arm hard enough to leave 4 bruises. She was in the way. I didn't mean, there is no end to that sentence that helps you, Storm said from the corner. Boulder removed an envelope, counted out $3,200, 3 months back rent, plus current month, plus 50 good faith. Write a paid in full receipt. Sign it. Date it. And then, Finch said, here is what happens next. You never contact Megan Dawson again. No phone call, no letter, no knock, not a look in the hallway. Because as of today, we know where you live, and we know where you work, and we ride through this part of the city every Sunday morning. Grissom's hand shook so badly it took him 4 tries to write the receipt. He signed it. Finch folded it into his vest pocket. The 4 men walked out. The engine started outside and rattled every window in the strip mall. But Grissom was not done. 30 minutes after the motorcycles left, he picked up his phone and called Child Protective Services. He reported that a 4-year-old girl had been wandering the city alone, that the mother was incapacitated, that the child was at risk. Every word was technically true, and every word was a weapon aimed at the woman upstairs. He hung up and smiled, because small men with grudges have a particular talent for finding exactly the kind of damage that does not require size. Back at the apartment, Stitcher had reached Dr. Helen Cartwright. She arrived at 12:40, 44 years old. She shook Hawk's hand. She examined Megan for 22 minutes. She looked at every piece of paper, the medical records, the dialysis logs, the insurance denial stamped in red. She looked at the home dialysis machine for a long time and then pressed her lips together. Then she sat across from Megan. Your renal function is at 8%, stage 5. Your heart is compensating and showing strain. You need a transplant or clinical dialysis 3 times a week. The home unit is not enough, I know, Megan said. Dr. Cartwright was quiet for a moment. My daughter was 22 years old. She had polycystic kidney disease. She was on the transplant list for 3 years. A compatible donor was identified 8 months before she died. The insurance denied the procedure twice. By the time the denial was overturned, her cardiac function had declined past surgical viability. She died at 22. Her name was Claire. That's why I'm here. Not charity. Because of Claire. Because I swore on her grave that if I ever had the ability to save someone who was running out of time because of money and bureaucracy, I would do it. You are on the transplant list. There is a compatible donor organ in the matching queue. Your insurance flagged your case as high risk. I can challenge that classification. We can move you through UT Health's pro bono surgical program, which I chair. I want to operate within the week. What are the odds? 78%. Without intervention, you have approximately 3 weeks. Then let's do it. Deacon had activated the phone chain at 11 that morning. By noon, it reached Houston and Dallas. By 2, it was in Oklahoma City and Baton Rouge. By 3, it was in Atlanta and Albuquerque, and 6 chapters in the Carolinas who had not spoken to San Antonio in a decade. Every single one sent money when they heard Jesse Dawson's name. $142,000 raised in a single day. Then at 6:15, the knock came. Not a biker, a woman in a gray blazer with a county ID badge. Child Protective Services. We received a report regarding a minor at this address. Hawk understood immediately. Grissom. The caseworker was thorough. She documented the apartment conditions, Megan's medical state, the dialysis machine, the empty refrigerator. She asked how a 4-year-old had walked 14 blocks alone. Stitcher stepped forward. Former combat medic. Certified EMT. He laid out Megan's condition in clinical terms. He explained the surgical plan, the timeline, the specialists. Ledger produced the financial records, $142,000, the housing arrangement, the recovery plan. The caseworker looked at all of it. She looked at Lily drawing on the floor. She looked at the 90-some men in the hallway. Patricia Hensley had been doing this work for 11 years. She had seen neglect and abuse, and she had seen the system used as a weapon by someone with a grudge. I'm going to recommend supervised monitoring rather than removal, she said. But I need a named legal guardian during the mother's hospitalization. Hawk stepped forward. That would be me. She handed him the forms. He read each page, not quickly, with the careful deliberation of a man who understood that what he was signing was a promise written in the language of institutions. He signed them, every line, his hand steady. And at that moment, Warren Calloway became legally responsible for Lily Dawson's welfare. He signed it without hesitation, because Jesse had trusted him with the only thing that mattered more than his own life. And this signature was nothing more than the formal version of a promise already made. They had agreed on Tuesday for the surgery, but Megan's body had other plans. Hawk got the call at 3:40 in the morning. Stitcher's voice, controlled and exact, the voice that meant time was running out. Her oxygen saturation dropped to 71. Respiratory distress. The home unit failed. Cartwright needs her at UT Health now. Hawk was on his feet before the sentence finished. Boots on, vest over shoulders, 65 years old and moving with the speed of a man who has spent his entire life being ready for the call that comes at 3 in the morning. How long? Hours. Not many. 4 calls in 90 seconds. The phone chain reached every man who had been at Hank's Roadhouse. The convoy assembled on Rosewood Court at 4:27, 92 bikes, 2 trucks, 1 ambulance. The November cold pressed against every surface. The only light came from strip mall security lamps and the blue-white glow of phone screens. Megan was loaded onto the stretcher at 4:31. Lily walked beside the gurney and held her mother's hand and did not let go. Even when the paramedics tried to guide her aside, she held on with both small hands wrapped around her mother's fingers as if the physical contact was a tether and letting go meant drifting. I'm right here, Mommy. Her voice was steady, 4 years old and steady. I know, baby, Megan managed. The oxygen mask was on her face. I know you are. The convoy launched at 4:33, 92 Harleys, 2 trucks, 1 ambulance, moving through the darkness in military formation, the ambulance in the center, bikes flanking it on every side, a moving fortress. An absolute refusal to let this woman die alone in the dark. Near mile marker 204, a Texas state trooper clocked them at 11 over the limit. He pulled alongside. He saw the ambulance. He saw the formation. He saw 92 men moving with coordinated purpose. The trooper killed his siren. He moved to the front and escorted them the final 47 miles. Lights flashing, road clearing, every intersection held open. Not one word was exchanged, not one word needed to be. At the hospital, Dr. Cartwright was already in scrubs. She had arrived before the convoy. She looked at Megan on the stretcher. She looked at the monitors. She received Stitcher's briefing in 4 sentences and processed all 4 simultaneously. Her face registered information without registering emotion because she was in the part that required precision. They wheeled Megan through the doors at 5:19. Lily walked beside the gurney, her yellow sneakers making small, squeaking sounds on the hospital floor. The rhythm of a 4-year-old keeping pace with time itself. At the surgical wing doors, the nurses stepped forward. Megan looked at Lily. Lily looked at her mother. If something goes wrong, Megan started. It won't, Lily said. Baby, listen to me. Mommy, Lily's voice did not waver. It won't, Megan lifted her pinky. Pinky promise. I fight my hardest, and you wait for me right here. Lily wrapped her small finger around her mother's. The IV line pulled. Megan's eyes filled. The tears did not fall because she was not going to let them fall in front of Lily. Pinky promise, Lily said. You come back and I'm the first thing you see. The surgical wing doors opened. The gurney moved through. Megan looked back once. At Lily standing in the hallway with 92 men behind her, and the rabbit under her arm, and the yellow sneakers on her feet, and the chin that would not go down. Not ever. Then the doors swung shut. And Lily was standing alone with closed doors in front of her, and 92 men behind her and nothing to do except the hardest thing a 4-year-old had ever had to do. Wait, Hawk crouched down. She climbed into his arms without being asked, pressed her face into his vest, and grabbed it with both fists. The tight, desperate grip of someone who has learned that the things you love can disappear without warning, and who has decided that the response is not to love less, but to hold tighter. She did not cry, and that absence of tears, that controlled steadiness in a 4-year-old who had every reason to fall apart, that was what broke every man in that hallway, because she should not have known how to do that, should not have been 4 and already understood that crying does not change outcomes, should not have already learned to budget her grief. Hawk held her and felt her heartbeat, small, fast, the heartbeat of something fragile asked to carry too much for too long. He put his hand over the back of her head and said nothing, because sometimes saying nothing is the most honest thing you can do. The waiting room was not built for 92 people. It had 43 plastic chairs, a television nobody watched, a linoleum floor that had absorbed years of grief. They filled it anyway. Every chair, every stretch of floor, men against walls, men in corners, men who had been awake since before dawn and were not going to sleep until those doors opened. The nurse Diane, who had worked the floor for 19 years, looked at the room and said very quietly, "I don't know what's happening in there, but every single one of those men would die for whoever's on that table." Hawk sat with Lily. Lily sat with her rabbit, and they held very still in the chair nearest the surgical wing doors. Lily was counting, her lips moving. 1, 2, 3, 4, Sarna, over and over, a private metronome. "You want to tell me something about my daddy?" She asked without opening her eyes. "First time I ever saw him scared," Hawk said, "was at his own wedding. He wasn't scared of anything. He was scared of one thing, not messing it up. He pulled me aside and said, 'Hawk, what if I'm not enough for her? What if I can't give her everything she deserves?' You know what I told him?" Lily shook her head. "I told him if he was worried about it, he was already doing it right. The men who aren't enough never ask the question." "Was he enough?" she asked. Hawk thought about a leather keychain burned in the last months of a dying man's life. Yeah, he was more than enough. At the 90-minute mark, a nurse came through. Every head in the room snapped toward her. "The first phase is complete. The donor kidney has been accepted. Dr. Cartwright is moving into the second phase. The patient is stable." The room exhaled, the smallest loosening. "Halfway isn't done," Flint said from the window. "No," Stitcher said, "but halfway is better than where we were at 5 this morning." Lily asked Finch for crayons. She sat on the floor and started drawing. She drew her mother first. Blonde hair and a big smile. The smile Megan had before the machine and the mattress. She drew her father. Same yellow hair, wings. Daddy has wings now. That's how come he can watch us from up there. Then brown figures, large and close together, filling every inch of space around the 2 central figures, working outward, one at a time. Fuse crouched beside her. "Which one's me?" "That one. He has the same face as you." "I don't look angry. You sometimes look a little angry." "That's just my face, Uncle. Deacon says you were born frowning." From his corner, Deacon's lips stopped moving for exactly 3 seconds. "The first time in over 12 hours. That's Uncle Boulder." Lily pointed at a figure with very large arms. Boulder looked at the drawing. Something moved through his face. The particular softness of a very hard man encountering the one place the hardness does not cover. "Who's the big one in the middle?" Fuse asked. "That's Uncle Hawk. You're in the middle because you're the most important." Hawk looked at the ring of brown figures surrounding the family so completely nothing could come through. "It's beautiful, Lily. It's not done yet. The circle needs to be thicker." "Can I have more brown?" Boulder walked to the nursing station and asked with complete sincerity for additional brown crayons. The nurse gave him the entire pediatric supply box. She worked for another 20 minutes. The circle got thicker, and then the doors opened. Every head moved, every body leaned. A nurse, young, who stopped when she saw the wall of attention. "Family of Megan Dawson." 92 voices answered. The nurse blinked. "All of you, all of us," Hawk said. "Dr. Cartwright will be out shortly. The procedure is in the closure phase." Both kidneys are functioning. Dawson is stable and breathing on her own. Nobody breathed for 5 seconds. Then Boulder sat down. His legs stopped working, and 293 pounds dropped into a plastic chair that screamed under the impact. His face went into both hands, and the sound that came out of him was the sound of a very large man releasing something he had been holding for 6 straight hours. Finch punched the wall, looked at the dent. "I'll pay for that. I'm sorry." The receptionist looked at the dent. At Finch. "Honey," she said, "don't you worry about a single thing." Deacon crossed himself 3 times, his hand shook. Because the steadiness was the asking, and the shaking was the receiving. Flint turned from the window and let the room see his face. His eyes were wet. The man who showed nothing stood there and let it be visible. Hawk moved between Flint and the room, giving him the cover of his back. That was all, because that was what you did for the people beside you. And then Dr. Helen Cartwright walked through the doors. She looked the way surgeons look when they have spent everything on something that mattered. Smaller than she had been 9 hours ago. Not diminished. Smaller the way a person is smaller after pouring themselves entirely into something. "She made it," Cartwright said. 2 words, and the room came apart. Boulder looked at Hawk, mouth open. Nothing came out. 22 years of knowing each other. Some things do not require language. Finch grabbed Storm. 3 seconds. Then they stepped apart and looked in opposite directions. Stitcher shook Cartwright's hand. Could not form a single syllable. 2 tours in Iraq, and he stood in front of this surgeon, speechless. And then Lily stirred. Uncle Hawk, small, soft from sleep. "Yeah, kid, is Mommy okay?" Cartwright nodded, then nodded again. "Your mommy's okay. Both kidneys. New ones. They work. Fixed. Like actually fixed. They work now." And then something happened in her face. Not the controlled steadiness, not the lifted chin. Something in all of that gave way. The scaffolding she had built to hold herself upright for 9 months gave way all at once. She screamed. Not a word. A sound. The sound that lives below language. In the part of a child's body where all the absorbed terror has been stored and sealed and is finally given permission to come out. She screamed for her daddy dying in a bed that smelled like medicine, for her mommy coughing through the nights, for the bruises on her arm, for the closet where she sat for 40 minutes silent, for the crackers and peanut butter, for the morning she got herself dressed because her mommy couldn't always get up, for 9 months of being 4 years old and not allowed to be. Hawk held her, both arms, full weight. He did not say it's okay. He did not say don't cry. He did not say be strong. He held her and absorbed every sob and stood there and was the wall. The thing that stays firm while everything else finally falls. Around them, 91 men stood in silence and let it happen. Boulder let his own tears fall. Deacon's shoulders shook. Flint cried openly. Few sat on the floor with his head bowed and let something that had been wound tight his entire life finally come loose. She cried for 13 minutes. When she stopped, it was gradual. The shaking slowed. She pulled back and looked at Hawk with swollen eyes and the particular raw radiance of a child who has just been given back the right to be exactly her age. "Can I see her? 5 minutes, Cartwright said. "She's sedated. She won't wake. But you can be with her." Hawk carried Lily to the recovery room. Megan lay on the bed, tubes in her arms, monitors on her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was for the first time in years correct. Lily reached out and touched her mother's hand. "Hi, Mommy. It worked. Dr. Cartwright fixed it. You kept your pinky promise." She climbed onto the bed, put her small hand on her mother's chest, directly over the heart. "I can feel it," she whispered. "I can feel your heart, Mommy. You're okay. You're really okay." She closed her eyes. Within 30 seconds, she was asleep, her hand on her mother's chest, her rabbit between them, listening even in sleep to the steady living rhythm of a body that had been rebuilt. Hawk stood in the doorway. He pulled the keychain from his vest, looked at Jesse's laughing face. "They're okay, brother," he said quietly. "Both of them. They're okay." He put the keychain back against his heart and stood in that doorway for 4 hours without moving. Because some promises don't end when the surgery is over. Some promises are just beginning. Megan opened her eyes on Thursday morning. The first thing she saw was Lily's face 4 inches from her own, pale blue eyes wide open, watching, waiting, with complete stillness and total attention. Mommy, I'm here, baby. Lily tilted her head. You look different. Not scared, peaceful, actually peaceful. Before you always looked like you were trying to look okay, so I wouldn't worry. This is different. This is actually peaceful. Megan reached out and touched her daughter's face with a hand that had no tubes in it. I'm not scared anymore, because you found them. Lily shook her head firmly. Daddy saved you, he wrote the message. I just delivered it. Megan looked at her daughter, 4 years old, yellow sneakers, one-eared rabbit, the unshakable conviction of a child who knows the difference between credit and truth. And she laughed, wet and weak but real, the first real laugh in 9 months. Yeah, okay, Daddy saved me. She pulled Lily forward until their foreheads touched. But you carried the message. We both did the important parts, Lily said. Yeah, baby, we both did. The brothers came in shifts over the following days. Not organized, not assigned. It organized itself the way things do when 92 people are paying attention to the same thing. Boulder arrived Tuesday with barbecue from a place Megan had mentioned once. You need to eat. Doctor's orders. Even though those were not remotely the doctor's orders, and Stitcher looked at the ceiling and said nothing. Finch came and sat with Lily in the corridor and let her explain coloring rules at great length. He sat on the floor with his face arranged in the expression of a man receiving critically important information. And every so often he said, okay, but what if I use blue there? And every time Lily said, that's wrong, Uncle Finch. And every time Finch said, why? And every time Lily explained it from the beginning. She's going to be a teacher, Finch told Hawk, or a judge. Something where she gets to tell people when they're wrong. She already does that. She's extremely good at it. On Saturday morning, 8 days after surgery, Megan sat up on her own for the first time, jaw set against the pull of incisions. I'm okay, she said before Lily could ask. I know, Lily said, but I'm watching anyway. Megan looked at her daughter and felt something move through her that had no clean name. Come here, she said. I need to tell you something. You were so brave these last 9 months, and I need you to know you never had to be that brave. That was not your job. You were supposed to be little. You were supposed to just be little. But somebody had to, Lily said, and you were sick. It's okay, I didn't mind, she paused. Well, sometimes I minded the peanut butter crackers. We had them a lot. Megan made a sound that was half sob and half laugh. When you get home, I will make you anything you want for breakfast every single morning. Waffles with rainbow sprinkles. Every morning. Uncle Fuse says that's not a nutritionally complete breakfast. Uncle Fuse is correct. But he also held you for 6 hours in a plastic chair, so he gets a vote. And his vote is that you should have what you want. Lily smiled, not the small, quick smile from that first Sunday morning. A real smile, full, unhurried. The smile of a child given back the time to have one. The conversation about the house happened on the 12th day. Hawk sat beside her bed while Lily was with Fuse and Deacon. Fuse was teaching her a card game. Deacon was supervising to ensure appropriateness, a dynamic that had been generating low-level debate for 45 minutes. We need to talk about what happens when you leave here, Hawk said. I can't go back to Rosewood Court. You're not going back to Rosewood Court. Hawk, I can't let you. You're not going back, he said again. Not unkindly, just settled. We found a house, 2 bedrooms, quiet street, good neighborhood. The oak tree in the front yard is about 60 years old, and Lily is going to love it. First month is paid, deposit covered, furnished, pantry stocked. Ledger set up a recovery fund for 18 months. After that, you're on your own, and I expect you to pay every dollar forward someday to someone who needs it. That's not charity. That's a system, and it's the only kind we run. You don't even know me. I knew Jesse for 11 years, and if he loved you the way he loved you, then I already know the most important thing. The most important thing is that you raised Lily Dawson. You raised that child. And she walked into a diner barefoot in her dead daddy's shirt and stood in front of 92 strangers and didn't flinch once. That kind of child doesn't come from nowhere. She came from you. There's a red door, Hawk said. Megan blinked. The front door. It's red. Bright red. Lily told me into the waiting room. She said the house she wanted would have a red door. She said red is the color of fire and her daddy's name was Blaze. And he always said they'd find a house with a real color door, so we painted the door. Megan pressed her lips together until they went white. He used to say that, she whispered, every time we drove past a house with a boring door. Megan, when we get our house, it's going to have a door with a real color, a color that means something. He said it 100 times, and Lily remembered. She was 3 when he said it last. She remembered every word. Okay, Megan said. Okay. The day of discharge came on a Thursday, 21 days after surgery. Megan walked out of UT Health on her own feet, slowly, hand on the railing, another in Lily's. The brothers were in the parking lot, 80 of them standing beside their bikes. They did not cheer, they did not make noise, they just stood there, present, and that was the whole of it. Hawk drove, Megan in the passenger seat, Lily on her lap. They pulled onto a quiet street, working street lights, children's bikes against porches, a 60-year-old oak tree, and a house with a front door that was red, blazing specific, unmistakable red. Lily was out of the truck before anyone registered the movement, running up the walk, stopping at the door, both hands flat against the paint, eyes closed. Then she turned around with a face that was pure joy. "It's red," she shouted. "Uncle Hawk, it's red." You remembered. She pressed her cheek against the door. "Daddy would love this. He always said our house was going to have a real color door." Then she looked at Hawk. "Daddy's the one who told me to find you, but you're the one who made the door red. That means you were already being family before you even knew you were." Years pass the way years pass when life stops being about surviving and starts being about living. Quickly, quietly, with the particular sweetness of things not taken for granted because the person experiencing them once came very close to not experiencing anything at all. Megan healed, not overnight, not without cost. The recovery was brutal. Weeks of pain, medication that dulled her appetite, physical therapy that left her shaking, and Lily sitting across from her every time saying Daddy didn't quit. "You don't quit either." Said it at 5 years old like she had been saying it for decades. Megan did not quit. By Lily's 6th birthday, the color was back in her face permanently. By her 7th, Megan had gone back to school for the paralegal certification she had put down when Jesse got sick. By Lily's 9th, she was running the contract division of a downtown firm. The brothers came every Sunday. Hank's Roadhouse, Route 35, a booth near the window, a girl with yellow curls, rainbow-sprinkled waffles, arguments with Finch about coloring. Boulder taught her to change a tire at 7. She got grease on everything, including a neighbor's fence. She loved every second of it. At 9, Ledger worked through math with her every Tuesday. She was 2 grade levels ahead in a year. By the 2nd year, she was asking questions that took him longer than a minute to answer, which had not happened since graduate school. "She's smarter than me right now," he told Hawk. "Not smarter than me at 9. Smarter than me right now, today." At 11, Deacon gave her a journal. Brown leather, thick pages, write everything down. Your dad never kept anything written. All we have now are memories and one photograph. Write it all. She filled 17 journals by 18. Every page, front and back. At 14, Flint took her to the hill country and showed her the bonfire site from the photograph. He talked for 2 hours, the most words he had said consecutively in his adult life. Lily sat in the stone ring the entire time, absorbing every word. When he finished, she said, "Tell me the part you left out." "You edited." "I could tell." Flint told her those parts too. The real man, complicated and loyal, sometimes wrong, always trying. "That's who I thought he was," she said. At 15, Judge taught her to ride. She fell twice, got back on 3 times, and the grin that crossed her face stopped every man present. Because it was Jesse Dawson's grin. The grin of someone who has found the specific thing they were built for. "She's a natural," Judge said. "She's her father's daughter," Hawk said. "No," Judge said, "she's better, because she knows what it cost." Then came the Thursday in November when Hawk was 71, and he sat Lily down at his kitchen table and told her what the doctor had said. He did not soften it. He had never softened anything for Lily, and was not going to start now because she had always met the truth head on, and it would have been a disrespect to offer her anything less. Lily listened without interrupting. Okay, she said, I'm coming every day. She paused. And I'm reading you pirate stories, the same ones you used to read me. You did all the voices, so I'm going to do all the voices. Fair is fair, the captain voice, Hawk said, low and slow and gravelly. She said, the parrot, ridiculous and high-pitched, just like yours. He laughed, and it felt like the best thing he had done in months. She came every day. She read to him while the Texas winter built itself outside the glass. She did all the voices without self-consciousness. The captain genuinely gravelly. The parrot so absurd that on the good days he laughed until he coughed. And on the harder days she kept reading through the coughing without pausing. Because she had learned a long time ago that you keep going. You keep reading. You keep holding on even when the person beside you is struggling. Especially then. One afternoon in February, just the two of them. I dreamed about your dad last night, Hawk said. What did he look like? Young? The way he looked in the photograph by the bonfire? Strong? Laughing? What did he say? Two words. Thank you. Lily took his hand. You didn't just keep a promise, she said. You gave us a life, Hawk smiled. The smile of a man who has ridden 1,000,000 miles and made 1,000 decisions and lost people and found people and arrived at the end of all of it at a specific and certain knowledge of what mattered and what did not. That's all I ever wanted, he said. He passed that night, quiet, warm, with the people who loved him close enough to touch. The funeral drew 400 bikers from every chapter in the Southeast. Engines revved 3 times in unison. The thunder of it rolled across the Texas hills and traveled for miles in every direction. Lily spoke. She stood in front of 400 men in leather and told them about a Sunday morning when she was 4 years old and walked into a diner in her dead father's flannel shirt and changed the world. She told them about waffles with rainbow sprinkles, about brown crayons and yellow sneakers and a red front door, about pirate stories in the captain voice, and 13 minutes of crying in a hospital waiting room. That was the moment she stopped being a child who had to be strong and became a child who was simply allowed to be. She told them about a man who carried her through the worst hours of her life and never once asked her to stop feeling them. She looked at the front row, the original brothers, grayer, some with canes, Boulder's hair completely white, Finch moving slower, Stitcher's hands still the steadiest things in any room, Deacon's cross replaced twice but always the same weight, Flint at the end, watching everything the way he always watched everything, all of them present, every single one. I found strangers that day, Lily said. They became my family. They saved my mother's life. They raised me, and they taught me that loyalty is not a word. It is a choice you make every day when it is inconvenient and expensive and exhausting and no one is watching. She held up her wrist. The leather bracelet with blaze burned into the hide. She had not taken it off in 16 years. My father died at 36. He never saw me start school, never walked me to anything, never taught me to drive or dance with me or told me about boys. But he did something most parents never have to do. He planned for a world without him. He wrote a message. He burned it into leather with hands that could barely hold the tool. He trusted 92 men with everything he had left to trust anyone with. And those 92 men moved heaven and earth for a 4-year-old girl they had never met because her father was their brother. And that was all the reason they needed. Her voice cracked. She let it. Brotherhood is not blood. It is showing up. It is keeping promises. It is riding through the dark to save a woman you have never met because her husband rode with you. And that means his family is your family. No exceptions, no expiration date. That evening, Lily stood alone before the memorial wall at the clubhouse. 2 photographs side by side. Jesse young and laughing by the firelight. Arm around Hawk's shoulders. Hawk silver-haired. The wolf tattoo visible on his forearm. Looking at the camera with the specific steadiness of a man who knows exactly who he is. She reached out and touched her father's face. Then Hawk's. We're okay, Dad, she said quietly. We're okay because you planned for us. Because you burned a message into leather with hands that shook and trusted 92 people with everything you had left. She pressed the leather bracelet to her lips. And Hawk, thank you for the red door, for the pirate stories, for holding me when I finally broke, for 92 uncles who showed up every Sunday and every birthday, in every crisis, and never once acted like any of it was more than they wanted to do. She stepped back from the wall. Outside, the Texas evening was warm and dark and full of the sound of crickets. And somewhere down the road, an engine, a single Harley, growing fainter. She listened until it was gone. Then she listened one moment longer. Because somewhere on the road between here and wherever the road goes after the last mile, two men were riding side by side, young again, laughing, shoulder to shoulder. The way they had been in the photograph the night the bonfire burned in the hill country and everything was still ahead. The engines go quiet. The men rest. But the family they built in fire and faith in 14 blocks of Texas pavement, in a leather keychain, in a dying man's trust, in a little girl who refused to look away, that family does not rest, does not fade, does not end. It rides on. In 17 journals filled front and back, in a red front door on a quiet street, in a woman who healed, in a young woman who never forgot, in 92 men who showed up when it mattered and kept showing up long after anyone was keeping score. Jesse Dawson burned his message into leather because he believed it would last longer than ink. He was right. It lasted forever.